colder weather means more time snuggling up with a book, and tonight we're talking with the author of Life and Other Shortcomings, Corey Adjmi. Hi, Corey.
Hi.
I'm so excited to talk to you. I know we've been talking on Instagram, so you know I just finished this book last night. I freshly finished your book so that we can talk about it today. It is quite an interesting book because it's actually 12 different stories, right?
Yes.
So what was the process like turning the stories into, one collection in a book?
Well, it was actually a slow process and wasn't something that I thought out knowing what I was going to do. I started out writing one story at a time and just seeing how that would work. And after I did one, let's say from the third person, I would challenge myself and try and do a different story from first person. And then I was slowly getting each story published. And it took some time for me to realize that all these stories were hitting on similar themes and that the characters might know each other. And so one day I thought maybe they should live in the same book. And I tried to link the stories. And it worked.
It's really cool. I know that the first story in the book, which is called Dinner Conversation, you won a prize for that story. Was that before the other stories? Was that the first one that you wrote or just the first one in the book?
That wasn't the first one that I wrote, but I did get a prize. And that was really fun too, because, when you're starting out especially, there's a lot of rejection, and getting something published is a great acknowledgement, but also winning a prize, and it's what keeps you going.
Yeah.
Because you're certainly not making any money, and you're doing it for the love, but you also need recognition sometimes, I think, and so those wins helped me to keep pursuing.
So what story did you actually write first?
The first one was Shadows and Partially Lit Faces, which is in the middle of the book, actually.
Okay. So what made you decide to shake up the stories in a different order than you wrote them?
Well, when I was linking them, I realized some of the stories could serve as backstory for some of the characters. So I started out the collection with Dinner Conversation because it has the most characters in it. There are about 6 characters in that story. And then some of my other short stories could be the backstory. So then that became the second story. And then I just tried to figure out what would the reader need to know when in order to tell this story almost like a novel.
One of my
So even though it's a collection of short stories, they're loosely linked, but they have an arc somewhat like a novel.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about the collection is that honestly, the minute I was done, now I needed to go to sleep, but the minute I was done, I was like, oh, now I want to read this whole thing over again. I want to start back at the beginning, especially
that's
first
super nice
chapter.
to hear.
Yeah.
And I've actually heard that, and I've heard that people have liked it even more the second time. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and so there is kind of, I don't know if you would call Callie the main character, I guess because it seemed like that was most written in the first person. So is there a reason why she was the main character, or is that just kind of what happened when you started writing these stories?
I think it's kind of what happened as I started writing the stories. She became like the center or the focus, and then all the other characters were just introduced as like parts of her life. But I think also because they were written individually, each character in each story does stand on their own.
Absolutely. I will say that one of the themes in this whole collection is, how men can be awful sometimes. So I appreciate it while reading, but I'm like, even the first story, which I actually think was my favorite, I was like, oh, I hate that guy. I want to read more about that guy, and I hate that guy.
Yeah.
Which happens a lot in real life too.
Well, I think one of the most interesting aspects of writing this collection was the fact that the stories take place over around 40 years. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of historical, cultural references that made it super interesting to me, and to think about how things have changed. So just for example, in that story, the husband does something that today would be considered fat shaming.
Yeah.
But when I wrote the story, I had experienced something like that in my real life, not personally, but I witnessed it. Uh-huh. And we didn't have a name for something like that then. And, in my gut, I knew something was really wrong, but like I said, we didn't have the language to really be able to express the feelings.
And for any men who are watching, I do think there's one story in here that is very redeeming to men, the story with Howie, because it's actually, he's kind of the main character in it. And you're like, oh, that's interesting. This one's about a guy.
Yeah, there are 4 stories that are actually from a male perspective.
Okay. And it's
even though it's revealing about women and women's lives, they're told from the man's perspective.
Yeah, so it's definitely a really good book. I like it as well because it is easy to read in the sense of the length, so you can go back and read it again if you want to check out the stories after you know more about the other characters. Corey, tell us where we can get our hands on this.
Oh, a bunch of places. Independent bookstores all over. Amazon and Barnes & Noble. So yeah, you can go to my website at CoreyEdgley.com, and I have links to lots of different places where you could purchase the book.
And quickly before we go, you're working on another book, right?
Yeah, so it's just about done. It'll be out in August 2022.
Awesome. Well, we look forward to hearing about that, Corey. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.